Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Wrap. I'm Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Makone Maja. Makone, let's get into the news of today. The President is expected to present the Government of National Unity's reform agenda in the opening of Parliament address. Makone, what do you want to see from the President? What can we expect, do you think? And, what changes do we need to see? The headlines in the news are along the lines of this will be the first time a president will outline a plan that may reflect policies and programs of other political parties and not informed only by the ANC. I think that remains to be seen. And I think this is going to be a very important marker on the road to see how different the Government of National Unity is from the ANC-dominated government beforehand. So what are you hoping to see from this?
There's so many ways, Nick, that members of the GNU diverge, but also that their constituencies diverge as well, is specifically on policy position. But I think that there, at least in my experience, has been a lingering air of hope and enthusiasm and excitement about this new system of governance. And I think that the president can seize the day and seize the moment by uniting all of us on that message of growth, of economic growth, through three things primarily. I think one is investments. I think the president should speak to how he plans to bring about investment into the country, but that the bedrock for investment, which is primarily property rights, must be secured in order for this country to be investor friendly. And there's two ways to secure property rights. One is from crime, right, which is an issue for ordinary South Africans, but is specifically, I think, for business as well. He needs to speak to us about how he intends to make this country safe, and also speak to the issue of expropriation without compensation. You cannot have secure property rights with a government that is looming and threatening to take your property away from you for whatever reason. And I think that the president still has the opportunity, because the expropriation is still before him. He has the opportunity to send it back to a different parliament now to review as to whether that those parts that we raised earlier in the year as the Institute as being unconstitutional. He still has the opportunity to send that specific bill back to Parliament. So I've covered two of those three things already. That's investment. He needs to talk to investors. He needs to tell us how he intends to make the country safe again. And lastly, to bring jobs. You need those two things first, investments and safety and security, to bring about jobs and really grow the economy. The economy cannot grow on social grants and welfare. And although increasing the reinforcements for social welfare have helped a lot of South Africans, I get the feeling that South Africans, what they really want is to determine their own future. And to do that, they need to have work. They need to make a living of their own and pursue work in their different capacities, but the state needs to enable that. And to enable that, again, you need investment and you need safety and security, and that will ultimately lead to the creation of jobs, which will not only widen economic participation, but it will draw so many millions of South Africans who live in abject poverty into work. And finally, we can close that gap of economic exclusion and economic marginalization of so many South Africans.
No, exactly. That's right. People definitely, I think, out there are very eager for the dignity of a job, the dignity of work, the dignity of being able to earn your own keep and not have to live off the state or your relatives or your friends or whatever. And economic growth is the only way to get those jobs. Of course, the other thing that economic growth does is it will provide more tax revenue, which will allow us to fund services for everyone, including the poor, and as well as social grants. Social grants are not sustainable without economic growth. So it is in everyone's interest, from the rich to the poor, to get economic growth going and for South Africa to reach high levels of economic growth, something like 5 or 6%, maybe higher to 7%. If we can match a country like India in terms of economic growth, within a decade, this country will be transformed in many, many important ways for the better. Okay, let's move into some interesting little political developments. This is in the Government of Provincial Unity in KwaZulu-Natal, which has had a little bit of a spat recently. Now, we're used to hearing of fighting between the ANC and the DA in these governments of unity, but in KZN, it looks like the IFP and the ANC have gotten a little bit annoyed at each other. The ANC has accused the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister in KZN of undermining the GPU stability, the Government of Provincial Unity stability, because they say the MEC has improperly removed, replaced, and appointed administrators, particularly in the Ngoma municipality, which they say he does not have the authority to do. And the ANC spokesperson said, in particular, the MEC has no authority to appoint an acting municipal manager and acting financial officer in Ngoma local municipality. Buthelezi, the MEC from the IFP in that government, said, "We want to remind the ANC that no party in the GPU was able to obtain an outright majority. Therefore, he should not act as if he's the alpha and omega of the GPU. A forensic investigation to procurement and employment violations between January 2023 and May 2024 would most likely lead to criminal charges being laid against senior ANC leaders in the province. If I were the ANC spokesperson, I would keep quiet, since the information at my disposal implicates even himself in the saga of the resignation of the former head of the department and his subsequent unlawful secondment to the national government." That is those are what we call, I guess, fighting words. So yeah, it's not just the DA and the ANC who have a problem. The IFP seems to also be having at least some issues with the ANC. Makone, what do you make of this story?
This was a bit of a tricky one to tease out insofar as the details are concerned. Some of the wording in the article, yeah, and even trying to do research on the facts of this case have been a bit, yeah, dubious. If the ANC is right that the MEC, Buthelezi, appointed an acting municipal manager who subsequently made appointments such as the CFO, the chief financial officer for that municipality, if the ANC is right that that is indeed what happened, then of course the IFP MEC would be found to be in the wrong about this. There's actually remarks that were made by Leon Schreiber that I think members of the GNU should pay close attention to and heed. And he was asked and pressed on the issue of illegal immigration. And what he said is what needs to happen is that we need to study the judgments in the cases where the Minister of Home Affairs was found to be wrong and understand those judgments and then move accordingly, decide to move forward, taking those judgments into consideration so that the same mistakes are not repeated, because these cases are very costly to the ministries, right? In legal fees, not only for themselves, but for their opponents when they lose. And there is case judgment on this instance where you have an MEC make an appointment of an acting municipal manager, which is not how municipal managers are appointed. They're actually supposed to be elected by council, right? Which would mean that if he had been appointed incorrectly, then whatever subsequent actions that person took as the mayor should also be reversed. That again will be a costly exercise on the municipality, not only to cancel the contract of this acting municipal manager, but also to go back and reverse whatever actions they undertook in their capacity as mayor at the time. But yeah, the threat with skeletons, the MEC seems to be threatening the ANC member, skeletons in the closet that he is aware of, and threatening to unleash them if he does not stop holding him accountable. That it seems we'll be seeing a lot of that moving forward, and I think it's a product of political action, which I actually welcome. I'd like to see more of this, and I think we should celebrate the fact that the hegemonic power of the ANC has been broken, and that there'll be a lot more rule of law. There'll be on both sides, right? In this instance, it's the ANC rightfully holding the IFP accountable, and in other instances, it will be other members of the GNU holding each other accountable. And this is very much welcome, because we've always had transparency in this country, but not so much accountability and very little rule of law. But we want to see the levers of democracy working, and rule of law is crucial to that. And yeah, I'm for one very pro seeing GNU members even hold each other accountable. I don't think it's a threat to the hold or mold of the GPU or the GNU. If anything, I think they're strengthening each other by rooting out acts that are wrong, or rooting out acts of corruption from among themselves.
Right. I mean, because of course the ANC's only other choice is to go into the arms of MK, which is not something they like. So maybe, a bit of squabbling and fighting and holding each other accountable is actually just what all of these parties need in order to improve their own performance. I do understand why, if the ANC would be making these accusations, because this particular municipality, I believe, is governed by the National Freedom Party, which is a ally of the ANC and a rival of the IFP. They're also a part of the Government of Provincial Unity, I believe, as well. This municipality we're talking about is extremely rural. It's very, very poor, relatively low access to services, very low levels of education and things. And I can imagine not the greatest functioning services. So this could be the case that, yes, it was improper for the MEC to have done this, but at the same time, it's also very possible that the people he was appointing and replacing were, shall we say, not performing as they should have. Okay, let us go on to another story about the politics of KZN, and this is another fascinating little data point. So, we talk quite a lot on the show about by-elections around the country. That's when we need to hold a new election for a local councillor out of season. And, by-elections can tell you some interesting things, but they're not the be-all and end-all, because they're often driven by very local dynamics. They often have quite low turnout. They're often driven by the quality of the candidates that the various parties put forward. So we've had some interesting results come out from the most recent round of by-elections. And one of them is that the MK party has failed to win a by-election in Newcastle. The IFP surged from 14% of the vote in Ward 28 in Newcastle to 40% of the vote. MK got about 29. Team Sugar, which previously, I believe, held the ward, who's a local organization in Newcastle, got 17% of the vote, and the ANC managed 13% of the vote. Rise Mzansi got 1% of the vote, and the EFF less than 1%. Now, this is interesting because in the entire country, MK has only won one by-election, which means they only have one councillor in the whole country, despite doing so well in the province. And that suggests to me that people are not voting for MK, they're voting for Zuma. And when Zuma is not, anywhere near the election campaign, because he's not going to go fly down for a single by-election, people are like, oh, well, what's the point? I'm not going to vote for MK. Now, 30% of the vote in this ward is nothing to sneeze at, but that ain't a victory. And you're going to need to do better than that in the local government elections if you really want to make a breakthrough across KZN. The other interesting result is that there were 4 wards in the Northwest and also in the Eastern Cape, where essentially you had by-elections between the IFP and the the ANC and the EFF. These are all ANC strongholds. And what's interesting is that the ANC remained pretty strong in these. Very little change in their vote. In fact, in many of them, it actually went up. So if the EFF is hoping that there's going to be some great uprising by the nation at the betrayal that the ANC has made an alliance with white monopoly capital or whatever nonsense they say, doesn't look like election results are suggesting that so far. Makone, what do you make of these by-election results?
It's the case of the personality cult. And I think that the MK party's success depends on the face of former President Jacob Zuma's face being on the ballot. And like you aptly said, Nick, if his face is not on the ballot, people just do not show up to the polls for the MK party. I think this is the 5th ward that the IFP has claimed in Newcastle already. So the IFP's growth seems to be really being stamped in these local by-elections, and they seemingly do not need to depend on their former and since deceased leader, Prince Mangosuthu. They can carry their own weight. Their councillors can carry their own weight. But it also makes sense that you don't have support for councillors, for MK parties councillors, because people are still getting familiar with the MK party. And like you said, a lot of by-elections are local politics, local issues related, that I think people still need to see MK being visible in their specific towns for them to really show up to the polls for them. So I'd give them a few more years to really stamp their visibility and to make those connections in their local areas before we can really see them being able to drive people by the droves to by-election polls. But that depends on when the MK party will still be around in the next 5 to 10 years.
Right. I think that's one of the big questions of South Africa is that can MK build local structures in a real way, or is it just going to sort of, can it even hijack ANC structures in KZN? And there's some indication that maybe they managed to do that in this local government election, but there isn't a lot of indication that that's necessarily going to happen going forward. And I think this is an unanswered question because it's very possible MK could consolidate, go into the local government elections, and particularly in KZN, deliver a strong performance. But there's also a lot of evidence suggesting that they're just not going to be able to get it together. I shudder to imagine the chaos that's going to happen when they start choosing candidates for local government for the 2026 local government election, because we've always seen every year this happens, particularly in KZN. There is an uptick in political murders as people fight over positions in local councils, and yeah, we're going to have to see whether MK can weather that tough environment and actually, put together something coherent. Because if they just put sort of nobodies or scallywags or whatever into local council seats, they're not going to do well. People vote for Zuma, and his word is not enough, I don't think, in many of these places. Yeah, and also, of course, do you have any thoughts on the other stuff I was talking about the other by-elections of the ANC? Seems to be remaining fairly strong in its traditional strongholds in the sort of rural Eastern Cape and Northwest.
Absolutely no surprises there. I think in many ways the GNU is actually going to strengthen the ANC because we're seeing them appear a lot more in the media, but we're also seeing them on sort of the opposition side, right, where they get to hold other parties accountable, as you're seeing now with the ANC with respect to the IFP in that specific municipality in Goma, I think. So we're seeing the ANC in a different light. We're seeing the ANC actually display their institutional political knowledge, which they've collected over 3 decades. It's a very interesting position to observe them in. And I think their supporters specifically are also getting to really see them for more than what has been in the past 30 years, which is that they've been the incumbent party, the party that has strongholds and a strong power base that's unshaken, but also that they never really get to challenge other political parties in a meaningful way and hold them accountable because those parties would not previously be in government, at least not to the extent that the ANC has been.
And while I think there are definitely ANC leaders who reject the alliance with the DA, there's no evidence yet that ANC voters are rejecting that alliance, which is an interesting thing to see. Once again, South African voters are not on the same page as their politicians in the ANC, and that is quite often the case. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. We hope you found this interesting. That's a wrap. The Daily Friend Show and The Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR, or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.